Coming up on tonight's episode of Faith versus Culture, churches are winning COVID court battles, even though the media is ignoring it. We'll cover it coming up.
To have sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
There are problems of sin and habit that cannot be solved outside the person of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Faith versus Culture right here on the CBN News Channel. My name is Dan Andros. I'm the managing editor at Faithwire.com, joined by author, journalist Billy Hallowell. Billy, what's going on?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. There's the usual chaos going on in the world and in culture and everywhere else. Just dealing with it the best, the best that I can.
It never calms down, right?
No.
Like you think, oh, it'll be better tomorrow. No, it gets weirder and crazier by the day.
And the funny thing is my wife, who's just, she's busy. We homeschool. She's busy, teaching the kids, and she doesn't have a lot of time to digest news. And sometimes she'll be like, hey, what's going on in the news today? And I'm just like,
you don't want to know.
I can't do it. I'm like, I
know.
can't recap it. I don't have the energy, hon. But she's found she'll read the website and she'll go to CBN, she'll go to Faithwire, she'll go to all these different sites, and then she's just like, wow, did you see this? And I'm like, I saw it, and she's getting all worked up, and I'm just like, but it's craziness, and it's kind of what we're going to cover today, coming up when we talk about Jack Phillips and the latest that he's going through. And I think a lot of Christians who just stick with their faith are going to, maybe not to the level he's dealing with it, but I think we're going to see similar types of pushback from culture. So we'll get into that coming up. But Billy, I wanted to start here, what we touched on here in the intro, that churches are winning these COVID battles. And this is a trend now. And it's something that we talked about a year ago, when churches seemingly were singled out of nowhere. You could go prancing around a Walmart and do whatever you wanted to in a Walmart pretty much, but church, it was like, whoa, these Christians are gathering for church. What's going on there? So real quick before we dive into this, Billy, just the two kind of stories that popped up on my radar here. First, in California, of all places, where they had probably some of the biggest restrictions, Governor Newsom has been ordered to pay $1.35 million in legal fees. And that's in just one decision. And there was another one as well, in which he lost. And that was Harvest International Ministries lawsuit against Governor Gavin Newsom. Of course, we know John MacArthur was going up against his local municipality there in California. So some big settlements. And now there's another one that just came out where in Nevada,
right?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a Nevada church. I saw that one too. Yeah.
Yeah, and they said the government can't single out churches. They had to pay $175,000 for singling out Christians. So it wasn't just this sense that we had as Christians in the media going, is it me, or are they just singling out the churches here at the beginning? That actually seemed to happen, and now the courts are making a decision.
Well, yeah. And I mean, if you go back and you look at this, I think at the beginning there was a lot of confusion, right? A year and a half ago, nobody really knew what was going on.
Yeah.
But you had stores like Walmart and these chain stores, and I get it. People are buying food, they're getting materials, they're getting things they need, but they're never shut down. I mean, these stores stayed open the whole time. At some point, you have this dynamic where a lot of us were pausing and we were saying, wait a minute. Why are the churches closed, but all these other businesses aren't? And isn't there a way for churches to safely gather? And it felt like every time you turned around, there was another headline. And I'm not saying these things aren't legitimate, but, singing could spread COVID. You had all these different things
Right.
going on. And you thought, well, isn't there a way to work around that? So when you talk about being protected equally under the law, I think we're actually seeing now, this isn't some conspiracy theory among conservatives or Christians, that the courts are finding that no, people weren't being treated equally, that churches, necessarily weren't being treated like other businesses and other places of operation. So that's notable. And I think we're probably going to see more of that as this continues to sort of unravel.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting now to look back because this is something in our consumer media culture that people are just so fast scrolling through their feeds and digesting content that we don't often stop and look back, and because the fire hose is just constantly coming, and you don't look back and see what happened. And I think the media just dismiss these things, and then they move on with life like nothing ever happened, and then there's no problem whatsoever. They just act like, hey, we didn't do anything wrong there. It's kind of like, wait a minute, you guys kind of messed up. And I feel like a similar thing happened to the churches. Churches were singled out in the 24/7 cable news arena. You saw lots of stories. Look at these churches getting together, and it was like this panic porn. Like, whoa, look at this, people together in a parking lot.
Well, and meanwhile, there were ministries out there that were legitimately, I mean, you talk about the Dream Center, these other places that are trying to, we talk a lot about essential services. Walmart was essential, and, the government got to kind of step in and decide. And I'm not saying they weren't essential, but my point is churches are handing out food, handing out clothing, handing out resources. This isn't just a place that people are going to sing and, pray, although that is happening in churches. It's a place where people are doing a lot of good for others, and these are essential services. Furthermore, you talk about the suicide rate, the overdose rate, all these other issues that churches and community actually help remedy. You talk about addiction that people have outside of the church. Basically, you were coming in, the government, and saying this stuff doesn't matter and this stuff does. And that is problematic for a lot of reasons. But to your point about the media, it's really interesting because you and I have looked a lot at these numbers over the years about media bias and journalists and how they behave. When you dive into the data, for years we've known that journalists tend to not be churchgoers, national journalists. They tend to not be Christians. And so you have this bias that sort of seeps into how these things are covered. And I would hope that next time, and it's not just a faith thing, it happens with a lot of other issues, that journalists would do a better job of asking these questions, not only about faith, but about the lab leak theory and about all these other things that, it's really easy to come back and say, oh, gosh, we should have done a better job. No, do a better job actively while you're covering it.
Yeah, and it would be nice if there was some accountability there, but oftentimes there isn't. And, and I just look at, the reason why we're seeing some of these cases now in California, Nevada, they're starting to win these cases. And at the time, I mean, I spoke with Jeremy Dice from First Liberty, and he said that, look, here in the early going, there is a legitimate legal case to say, wait a minute, we don't know what this pandemic is. We don't want the hospitals to be overrun. That would be really, really bad. Then once it became clear that no matter what the numbers were, we weren't going to overwhelm the hospitals. Very good chance we weren't going to do that. That's when the goalposts got shifted. And that's when things got dragged out for a very long time. And, these measures in several states were kept in place for, I mean, some places still have these measures right now. And I mean, that's ludicrous, especially given the numbers that we're seeing right now. They're so low. I mean, we're getting down to this thing almost being gone. But that's the reason they're looking at the Constitution here. And regardless of whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, you should just understand that, look, we need to preserve the right to express ourselves, to meet freely. We cannot just, bow down in fear so easily, because if we do and we allow that to happen, well, that will become the norm. I mean, the governments have shown over time, over history, that they will abuse that power. So I think we're seeing that the Constitution is holding up, and that's a good thing.
Well, and as long as we have a culture where church is being pushed to the side, God is being pushed to the side, these things are not deemed important, it becomes interesting, and I think really an important topic for us as Christians to make sure we're on top of this and we're involved and we understand what's happening, because it becomes even easier for government officials and others to just say, this doesn't matter, this isn't essential, who cares? And I do think there's an element of that played into this, that it was very easy. Where did a lot of this stuff happen? It happened in big city areas where the assumption is that there's a lower proportion of Christians and people who care about faith, particularly elected leaders. And it becomes this simple thing like crumbs on a table to brush off. And we know these freedoms are deeply important. The First Amendment protects these things. And so I am actually encouraged to see judges upholding that. And listen, most churches took an approach to this that I thought was middle of the road, appropriate. People wore masks. There was distancing. There were some churches that didn't do that. And I think that's another conversation. It's interesting to kind of talk about people who kind of came in really hot, like, we're not going to listen to the government from day one. But that wasn't most churches. Most churches did listen.
Yeah, they did. And, I think you're right. I mean, I think a measured approach there does end up making a good witness for Christ. And so
Absolutely.
it's, and that's a debatable, and I know people have a wide a wide view on that. But I know that there are some churches that are still not meeting together, and I think that's causing a lot of division within the church. And again, that's another conversation, we can have another day. And I want to touch on Canada too on the other side of the break here before we get into Jack Phillips and the things that he's going through, because Canada, I think, is kind of a picture of what would happen if we didn't have the Constitution that we had and it didn't hold up. So we'll talk about that and more on the other side of the break. This is Faith versus Culture. Back in a second.
I am Regent's first ROTC graduate student.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Wednesday night at 8:30 on the CBN News Channel.
How'd you like to get a redo on your health, on your body, on your arteries, so you could have the energy you had 20 years ago? The great news is you can. I'm Dr. Mike Roizen, chair of the Wellness Institute at the Cleveland Clinic. I've written 4 New York Times bestsellers. But even better than having to read all that, you can listen to this DVD and watch it. Protect your heart? Yes, you can. Here's how.
Go to CBN.com or call 1-800-700-7000 for your free copy of Protect Your Heart. Let the medical experts show you their new discoveries on how to avoid heart disease and even reverse it. Easy steps to uncover the hidden dangers in your medicine cabinet, reduce stress, and get a complete do-over for your health. Call 1-800-700-7000. That's 1-800-700-7000. Or go to CBN.com to claim your free copy of Protect Your Heart.
All right, welcome back to this episode of Faith versus Culture right here on the CBN News Channel. Dan Andros here, Billy Hallowell there. We were talking about churches and how they handled the COVID pandemic, sort of looking back and seeing now that the churches are winning court cases. Of course, the media is not covering generally that part of it. They covered it at the beginning when they thought they were breaking all the rules. Now that they're winning the court cases, it's kind of like they've moved on.com. So we went through that, broke that down a little bit. Quick wanted to mention Canada because I think it's a real interesting juxtaposition to see what happens in a country that maybe doesn't have the constitutional protections that we have. In Canada, there's pastors going to jail and they're still being fined, and churches are being fenced up.
It's crazy. I guess for me, I almost, and I'm not saying I agree with this, I would understand fines. Like, you just keep levying fines. You're not going to listen to the law. Now, we can have the debate about whether or not the law or the regulations are a good thing. But arresting a pastor, to me, is one of the most egregious, insane. Like, I can't imagine any local authority or any province in Canada, they're called provinces, or any national figure thinking this is good optics to be arresting a pastor, right? I mean, it's insane. Yeah, it's completely insane. I mean, we ran video of Pastor Coates' church holding underground church service, and they opened the service saying, did you ever think you'd be part of the underground church? And they're all like, no. But there they were worshiping faithfully. So good for them. But see, people are targeting those. And and you get into this conversation. I saw a lot of people saying, well, and these were Christians saying, well, they're not loving others. They're not willing to do this, and that. Right. I mean, this is the debate that's being had. But I do think there's a broader issue here about how much power is going to be given to the government, right? And this is not some conspiracy theory commentary. The reality is, it's not like people are making this up. There are places all over this world where the government or a government has taken power, has ceded people's rights, and it's not a crazy thing to worry about. Again, people are arresting pastors, so I'm pretty sure we're at a point of strangeness and concern that we should be addressing this stuff. Right. And again, like
again, standards are set during times like this in the pandemic. And if you allow them to just say, well, it's the law and you have to follow it. Okay. And you go with that, let's follow that logic. Okay. Now, when they decide, as they have tried to in Canada, to say that anything that says being gay is a sin is hate speech and harmful, and we've got to shut that down. Well, now you've ceded that ground that you can't worship freely. You can't hold your own views. And now you're going to give them the authority to make a law on that, and they can come right on in there and shut you down. And, that kind of is a lead in there to our next story, talking about Jack Phillips. Billy, I believe you talked to him, and he's going through some crazy stuff still after all these years.
Yeah, I just had him on my podcast, and he's got a book out kind of telling his story, because a lot of people, when they hear about Jack Phillips, and if people aren't familiar, this is the baker out at Masterpiece Cake Shop in Colorado. He's the one of the bakers who declined to make a cake for a same-sex couple. I mean, this was in 2012. So you're almost 9 years now. You are 9 years past this refusal. So a couple comes in, he declines to make the cake. He said he did it very kindly. The couple freaks out. And they basically go to the state and they file a complaint. And most people probably know this story. And the state steps in and they want to levy fines, and they want Jack to retrain his staff, and they want him to be reporting to the government. Again, we're talking about the government here coming in. And he won his case in court. Essentially, it's a little complicated, but the Supreme Court sent it back to Colorado and basically said that Colorado had not treated him fairly due to his faith. Now, his legal battle continues, though, because he has a new legal battle. There was a transgender activist who called asking for a transition cake, and he declined to make the cake. And so we're again in this legal battle. But it's interesting because one of the things that he shared was that within 20 minutes of that couple leaving, he was getting attacked through phone messages and emails. So it happened very quickly, and then it became a national news story. But he actually had people calling him and threatening to kill him. He had one guy who called and said, I've got a gun, I'm on my way. And keep in mind, this is a guy who's got 4 employees. One of them is his daughter. His mother works there. His elderly mother was working there at the time. And this guy is petrified. And so it gets you thinking about what's wrong in culture, but also about how we got to a place where you can't disagree with someone without having that kind of vitriol.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to, we look at these stories, and it's not just because, oh, look at this crazy case. I really do think that as a Christian, you're gonna in your circles at some point, especially if this, the LGBT activists, keep pushing these things. It definitely has a bit of a bullying vibe to it, where it's not just, there's the coexist bumper sticker that we all have seen, but it doesn't really feel like that. It feels like you better conform, or else you're going to get the Jack Phillips treatment. And so, and I personally have known several people that have had job problems, lost jobs over just taking a stand and saying, well, no, I can't co-sign on and saying that because my beliefs say this about marriage. And so there just really doesn't seem to be this reciprocal respecting of beliefs. And I think as Christians, we need to prepare for that, because you could be labeled certain things and lose jobs and lose opportunities in the whole 9 yards if we're not prepared to handle this correctly. And I think and not that there's a perfect way to do it, because you don't want to cave on your beliefs, but we also don't want to be just sort of dismissive at the same time.
Well, and like having conversations with people who disagree with you and being able to walk away and not hating them, I think that there's this real toxic thing, and it's been going on for years, but I think it's at a fever pitch right now, where it's like you can't find any area of agreement. So that person is just a demon, and I'm never going to talk to them, and they're so awful. One of the things about Jack's case is that in his most recent legal battle with the transgender activist, a gay patron actually came into the court and defended Jack and talked about how Jack there's a really cool example of somebody who doesn't share his viewpoint on marriage, obviously, saying, listen, Jack has always treated me well. He's always served me. It wasn't about who I am. And there have been others who have stood up. I remember when I was working at the Blaze, there was a story about a print shop in New Jersey, these 2 women who own it. And I believe that they're married, and they were defending Jack as well at the time, saying, listen, we wouldn't want somebody coming to us and telling us to print anti-gay shirts. And so I think when people can come together and agree to disagree, that doesn't mean bending what you believe or abandoning what you believe, but listening to other people. That's a good thing. But one more thing about this, the pendulum swinging, if you feel like you were mistreated and you're in a specific group of people and then you gain power and then you start to mistreat the group that you felt like was mistreating you, and that's what's going on here, that pendulum is just going to keep swinging. And that's not a healthy thing for culture.
Yeah, absolutely not. And I want to talk about one other area where I think Christians are butting heads with culture coming up, and that is critical race theory and critical theory. And we're seeing a lot of people start to speak out against that now. We'll talk about that coming up on the other side of the break. This is Faith versus Culture.
Hey, if you're tired and exhausted all day, you can't think clearly, and you really just need a cup or even a pot of coffee to get through your day, then join me, Dr. Josh Axe, for this new series where I'm going to teach you how to transform your diet and use essential oils and supplements to get a better night's sleep.
Wake up to your best life. Call 1-800-700-7000 to get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
It's about the competition.
I kind of put that pressure on myself, and I think people had expectations.
It's about overcoming.
We use this phrase all the time, keep chopping, keep practicing hard.
It's about going the distance.
I think as a father, it's my job, to lead, just be the best husband and father I can be.
Watch Going the Distance with Sean Brown Saturday night at 7:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries around the world, and with your help, we can do even more. There's an old African proverb I love that says, if you want to run fast, run alone. But if you want to run far, run together. At Orphans Promise, we want to run far so we can touch the lives of as many orphaned and vulnerable children as possible. But we don't want to go alone. We're out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
Welcome back to this episode of Faith versus Culture. Dan Andros here, Billy Hallowell there. And Billy, the next area we're going to hop into here, just real quick because we're running out of time, but another area that I think Christians need to brace themselves for is this critical theory debate. And wherever you fall on this issue, that I know it's just hotly divided. And so we're seeing churches, I know the SBC right now is, they're debating a number of things, kind of how they've handled this sexual assault cases in the past. Apparently there's some, mishandlings of those, and I don't know the full extent of it yet. I haven't done the full research there, but some problems there. But then with critical theory as well, making its way into many churches, and they're divided on that with Resolution 9. And so these are things that if it hasn't come to your church yet, the issue is probably going to pop up at some point. So it's good now to get prepared.
Well, yeah, and it seems like, in schools, this is a huge issue too with parents, and you have to wonder if after a year and a half of basically not homeschooling, but homeschooling well, but remote learning, if parents are hearing things or seeing things, or they're more in tune with because that's blowing up. A lot of parents are like, what in the world is going on? And everybody has a different definition of this stuff. But my thing is this, and I'm always super careful when I talk about this. As Christians, Jesus says the two most important things: love God and love others. And there's no room for racism when you're loving others. And there's room for listening to others. There's room for compassion, but there's always room for truth. And I feel like whenever we start to embrace systems and ideas and things, especially ones that can't be pinned down, nobody can really tell you what this stuff is, it becomes problematic. And so I always say, go back to the basics. If you're doing what Jesus calls you to do, and you're letting the Holy Spirit guide you, you're not going to be violating those things. And I think, again, part of it is listening to people, understanding different perspectives, and being open to that. Even if you're not sure you like what you're hearing, right? Being able to say, okay, what is your experience? So for me, I think it's important for us to be very aware of these things and to make sure that no matter what is happening, we're putting the gospel first and not something that the world is embracing, not something that the world is telling us to believe. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of my approach to all of this.
Yeah, I think it does make sense. Absolutely. And we've only got a minute left here, Billy, but I want you to we can end this thing on a positive note. We talked a lot about the controversial things that are going on. So you've got a story here that can take us out on a positive, uplifting note.
I love this story. It's this girl, Caroline Campbell. She's 28 years old. She has Down syndrome. And I mention that because she has been on this amazing feat over the past 10 years. It's taken her 10 years. She has handwritten and copied every part of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. And they had this amazing ceremony at her church where she wrote the last line of Revelation. And she's got 43 notebooks filled with the Bible in her hand script. And it's just an amazing testament to what God can do with every one of our lives. People would look and say things, I'm sure, about her or assume things. And here she is doing something that I would venture to say almost nobody else has done ever, maybe a Bible translator. And so it's a pretty cool story. It's uplifting. I've written about it over at PureFlix. People can read that. But I love that kind of stuff. I love seeing stories of people who overcome the odds. Who has the patience to do that, to write every word of the Bible, right? And it's amazing.
Yeah. Not me, and it just goes to show, definitely, as you said, that God's got a purpose for everyone. And so, Billy, thanks for joining us. We are out of time, and we'll be back to close it out on the other side of the break. Thanks a lot.
Daddy?
Yeah, buddy?
How many nickels are in a dollar?
There are 20 nickels in a dollar.
How do birds fly? Does milk really make my bones stronger?
Yeah.
Daddy, when we die, will we go to heaven?
Do you have the answer to life's biggest question? Call the 700 Club. We'll help you find answers to the important questions life brings your way.
Watch breaking news, in-depth exclusive stories and programs from health to entertainment you won't find anywhere else. The CBN News Channel, a perspective you can trust. Enjoy credible news reporting from around the world. Discover inspiring programs and stories of hope, all in one place from a Christian perspective. The CBN News Channel, a perspective you can trust. To watch the CBN News Channel, download the app or visit cbnnewschannel.com.
Hello, I'm Dr. David Perlmutter, board-certified neurologist and #1 New York Times bestselling author. Wouldn't it be great to boost your energy, eliminate brain fog, and even reverse brain disease? Well, you can, and I'm going to show you how, along with some of the world's most well-respected brain experts in this DVD, Protect Your Brain.
Get Protect Your Brain, a free DVD only from the Christian Broadcasting Network, featuring experts on the cutting edge of neuroscience and brain health.
No matter how many times you've failed in the past, you really can do this.
In Protect Your Brain, you'll discover simple strategies to keep your brain young and healthy. Improve your memory. Discover the gut-brain connection. In Protect Your Brain, get your free copy at cbn.com or call 1-800-700-7000.
If you want to improve the quality of your life, get the DVD Protect Your Brain and get it today.
All right, that's all the time we have for this episode of Faith versus Culture. Thanks again for being here. Have a great week. We'll be praying for you, and we'll see you back here next time. God bless.